If you watched or listened to last week's episode, we revisited my interview with Rachel Reeves for a podcast called Acting Prime Minister a few years ago to compare how power has changed the Chancellor in the course of just a few years. I also interviewed, back then, Keir Starmer for the show. That was more than 5 years ago now, January 2020, just before he became Labour leader, to get his vision for power. So the Talking Politics team had a look back at the archive, and ahead of today's recording, one answer right at the end of the interview stood out. This is what Keir Starmer said 5 years ago. A couple of quick fire questions just for fun. President Trump or President Putin?
Oh, neither. That's a choice nobody should have to make. Let's change them both.
So we thought it would be interesting if Robert asked the Prime Minister a similar question today and put those comments to him, because obviously now he's Prime Minister, he's in a slightly tighter spot, and Robert did so very kindly, so this is what happened.
In 2020, you chatted to my colleague Paul Brand on an ITV podcast, and he asked you, President Trump or President Putin, which one will you choose? You said, neither. That's a choice nobody should have to make. Let's change them both. Back then, you were right, weren't you?
Well, I didn't get to choose the president of any other country. President Trump has got an amazing mandate, historic second term, and we have a very good relationship between our countries. I have a good relationship with the president. That's in our national interest. We'll continue in that vein.
Okay, so Robert, which one do we think is the real Keir Starmer? 2020 or 2025?
Okay, the real Keir Starmer is a subject that me and Anushka have been talking about for months. So I think let's not go with the real Keir Starmer. I think the more relevant thing is his face when I asked him the question, because what was really striking is there's definitely been a change in terms of his own psychology vis-a-vis the US president, I would say in the last couple of weeks, maybe just in the last small number of days. Because what's really interesting is up to today, if I'd asked him that question, he would have been very serious, very stern, simply concentrated on the words, which he wants to try and be nice to President Trump. But he beamed. When I said...
He sort of laughed, actually.
When I said you were right back then, he beamed, right? I mean, it was really interesting to watch his face. And that really spoke volumes. And what he was basically saying is, I've got to be nice to President Trump because, you know, I don't want to have a public row with him. And really the whole thrust of the interview was about what is now a global financial crisis made by Donald Trump. He doesn't attack Donald Trump personally in the interview, but he repeatedly says tariffs are a mistake. Free trade is a good thing. Donald Trump's tariffs are causing us enormous harm, and they are a mistake.
So do you think he's sort of starting to put a bit of distance between himself and Trump after weeks since the inauguration of sort of cozying up to Donald Trump? Do you think he's willing to be a bit bolder now?
He knows. Well, he said two related things. One is he said tariffs are a permanent feature of this new world, right? Okay. He is absolutely explicit that he does not believe there is any world in the next few years while Trump is there where we go back to anything that looks like free trade, right? So that in itself is obviously hugely significant. And then the second thing that he makes clear is he wants to have better trading relationships with those countries that, like Britain, are in favour of free trade,
like
the European Union.
Which we used to have a very good trading relationship
I mean,
with.
the interesting question, which I wasn't able to put to him, I did talk to him about the damage that has been done by this vicious now trade war between America and China. 104% tariffs imposed by Trump on China. I think it's now 84% tariffs retaliation.
Yeah.
China on America. Talks explicitly about how damaging all this stuff is. And in a sense, the sort of, look, he's not going to go to war rhetorically with Trump, but he needs to get close to the EU. He needs to get closer to Canada. And interestingly, I suspect that they will have to also try and get a bit closer to China as well. So, in that sense, that's where a bit of distance comes in respect of Trump.
Anushka, just going back to that clip, who do you believe, the 2020 Keir Starmer or the 2025 Keir Starmer?
I mean, I think in both cases, Keir Starmer was being small p political. So I don't think we can know that he believes either of them truly in his heart. In 2020, he was trying to win the Labour leadership campaign, and he was entirely shifting himself to the left in a way that we now know is probably not the real him. And now he's doing what he thinks he has to do to try to maintain an economic relationship with the US. And as Robert says, we've been discussing for some time who is the real Keir Starmer. I remember going back to Leeds University with him and reading out to him stuff he wrote in magazines when he was 22, which was really quite lefty, although also it was also quite loyally and academic, I would say. I mean, the conclusion I've come to with Keir Starmer is that he's just not ideological. He is a pragmatist above all else, and that means that he changes his position to do what he thinks is the right thing at that right moment. Now that's, you could argue a sensible thing to do, or you could, if you're a kind of ideological political person, think that it means he lacks values. I was thinking about this the other day on the subject of international aid. Watch Keir Starmer 4 years ago on international aid. He passionately argued that cutting international aid would make the world a more dangerous place. Now he, kind of passionately argues the opposite, that the only way to make the world safer is to spend that money on defence instead. I suspect both things are things he believes in that moment, but he is not someone who has sort of that kind of politics that some of his colleagues have running through his veins. He's pragmatic.